people have either spoken to or interacted over with LinkedIn. So what we'll do today is I'll just do like a brief outline of like who Antler is, what we do, how it all works. But then most interested to hear from you all. So like all questions are welcome. It can be, you can do it via the chat or like raise the Zoom hand when we get to it. But I'll take any questions on either Antler, VC, founder journey, like anything at all. So if that sounds like a plan, I will get us started and kick into it whilst a few latecomers are just arriving. So who is Antler? So we back people at day zero. That means you'll never hear Antler say you're too early for us. We may say you're too late for us. We may say you're not good enough, but that's a different scenario. So we believe that there are idea stage businesses which can be pre-product, pre-revenue, which need that capital to be able to achieve the venture scale outcomes. And what that looks like in what we've done in Australia is more than 1,000 founders have been through the program over the 12 iterations thus far. We've invested in about 300. We've made nearly 150 investments. And we started in Sydney in 2021, opened up in Melbourne. And for February next year, we are extremely pleased to be having our first Brisbane in-person residency there as well. It's not just Australia. There's 27 cities worldwide, and there's a lot of both like data and experience we've gained from the what are we getting towards 1,500 companies invested in, and a lot of exciting stuff there. I think what's most relevant for you all as founders is that we've seen the most successful of our businesses raising capital from overseas investors sooner rather than later is a determinant of success, and that we're well positioned to be able to help on that journey with both like funds in other areas, the equivalent of myself and my team in the other major markets, but also like the network of global investors and customers that we can provide. I think the other thing which is worth talking about, although we're not designed as an impact fund, actually what happens when you get great people together going after exciting problem spaces is nearly half of the businesses end up being impact businesses as measured by UN Sustainable Development Goals adherence. So who would you be talking to in Australia? So I think if you look at for the partnership group, so Bede, he co-founded Lazada in Indonesia. That got acquired by Alibaba for a large sum. Mike was number 2 employee for Uber in Asia Pacific. He was then a founder and exited to an ASX listed business. I've played a bunch of exec roles in other places, worked directly for Brian Chesky at Airbnb, opened up Google's offices in South and Southeast Asia, had an aborted IPO, maybe a story for another time. Sarah runs our like marketing and scouting. She ran Business Insider and a bunch of media titles in Australia. And Michael Cron, he's a former founder, senior consultant, and former lawyer and solicitor. They're some of the people that you would most obviously deal with throughout the process. We also have like a set of venture partners who are who's who, including multi-time VC partner, exited founders for large sums, someone who exited the biggest Central European grocery delivery firm, and active investors themselves. So what you get through the combination of this is, although we are investors and we work in venture capital, we're all founders, entrepreneurs, early stage operators ourselves, versus being people who are more comfortable sitting behind Excel and giving a hard time on like the financial projections. We know what it's like to build businesses. We enjoy being at that super early stage, and we should be able to give some like good advice, help them avoid some pitfalls, but also actually understand and have empathy with what it feels like to go through this founding process. What are the types of people that come to Antler? So there's 3 main archetypes here. So there's tech and product builders, business and operators, and then domain experts. I won't talk about all of them. I'll just pick a couple to go talk about. So on tech side, let's talk about Ksenia. So Tactic is for those of you using Fireflies or other meeting transcription notes, I would recommend Tactic. It's far less obtrusive and better. But Ksenia's used senior developer and tech exec at places like High Pages and Atlassian. She joined with Nick in the Antler process to co-found Tactic about 4 years ago. Fast forward 4 years, they've raised like a 10 million US Series A, valued about 50 million USD overall, and their growth that they've been able to achieve with a small number of employees is extremely impressive. On the business and operators, let's talk about Lars. So Zaliant is a computer vision at the edge company playing in deep tech. So if you were to ring a Ring doorbell, and that you wanted to have facial recognition as to who's there, but not have to go up to query the cloud to have that managed on the edge. That's what Zalient do. Most recently, got investment from Sony Ventures as part of their Series A. The reason I choose Lars is that he's a three-time exited entrepreneur. Interestingly, like he came into Antler not with a very fixed idea. He was just interested in, he had a bunch of expertise in areas that he could be dangerous in. That actually was when he met Shivi, who was commercializing his PhD research, that they came together and formed Zalient. And then on domain experts, let's talk about Sky. So Upcover, they've recently raised a Series A as well. They are, Sky would describe herself as the person who knows, one of the 10 people in Australia knows the most about insurance. I think in reality, she's probably maybe number 1, 2, 3, and 4. But she came in with a very clear view of like what the problems were in the insurance industry. Met a co-founder Anish in the Antler process, actually on day one at the drinks, and they've been driving in terms of doing insurtech for small businesses and being able to underwrite things ever since. There's a couple of the pen portraits when you put it into stats. What it looks like is it's, you know, a relatively the average person is relatively seasoned, so it's about 11 years is the mean work experience. There's obviously a skew to people who have looked to have founded businesses before and or worked in VC-backed businesses, and that we aim for a really strong balance between those with technical and or domain skills and those with like business, commercial, operational skills. The classic tech co-founding team is a builder and a seller, and we're aiming to give that surface area for co-founder matching and opportunities to happen. So there's a couple of businesses that we backed. I've spoken about Tactic and Zalient. Path Zero's another one. Carl used to run a very successful hedge fund, and it's now a solution for asset managers to be able to manage the Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions for the companies that they have invested in. This gives you a flavor of like how some things can move and what things can look like in the first year and beyond for coming in and out of the Antler program. At the bottom right, there's a bit of a who's who of Australian investors there, but like I said before, what we're seeing is an increasing trend, and one of the things we're aiming to encourage is actually overseas investors coming earlier to Australia and them leading rounds as top. Typically, that has greater long-term benefits. What you can get from this slide is not just that everyone uses the same logo design company to be able to come up with their logos, but we, as a result of bringing fantastic founders together, we end up with a pretty wide range of businesses that we invest in. The reason I share this is to say that we're not like, yes, I love a good bit of B2B SaaS, but unlike many others, particularly in the Australian market, we're not only B2B SaaS. In the last 12 months, we've done D2C hardware, we've done robotics, logistics, we have done insurtech, we've done prop tech, we've done D2C health, we've done consumer, we've done marketplace. So the reason why I share that is that our thesis is around finding the best founders with an unfair advantage to go after a problem. That means there's nothing a priori, if it's VC scale, that we would not invest in. So we welcome things coming from the most niche and weird corners of the internet. So what does Antler process look like? So the way to look at this is the left-hand side is the Antler residency. So that's the 10-week program that we're recruiting for now. And then the right-hand side is once you become an Antler portfolio company, this could be up to a 10-year journey, and it's very much condensed, but I'll focus on the residency side first, which comes in itself in 2 flavors. So it's formation and validation and due diligence. Formation and validation is the first half. Main purpose here is to find teams who've got a problem, which is a VC scale, very deep, challenging, hard problem to solve, and a complementary co-founding team with an unfair advantage to be able to go solve it. No, I say this point, we're talking about a problem. Many solutions will come later. What we're looking for is really focusing to the problem you're trying to solve, and then spending time with us in some of the networks that we provide of how to validate those and be able to move forward. Then the second half of the program is due diligence, where there is a team. You would spend time with your coach. That could be me, it could be one of our venture partners or other partners. And our goal is to be like an extension of your business, to be able to help provide networks, accountability, and ultimately get you as investor ready as possible at the investment committee, which culminates as residency. Then for those which we invest into, become a portfolio company, and particularly that first year when typically we're the sole investor, there we know that this is where we need to drive a lot of value and provide a lot of support, but particularly on the fundraising side. And this is where, for a combination of plan introductions and actually working through some structured follow-on support, which I'll talk about in a second, that's how we look to be able to move things forward. And then with the opportunity to go global with Antler's international funds, that's just another benefit that we can provide. What we've done in order to drive that success is what we've seen from the 1,500 odd investments globally is that if post-Antler, a team raises a minimum of 250K USD in that first 12 months, they've got a nearly 50% likelihood of raising a Series A. If they don't, it's more like a 10% chance of raising a Series A. Therefore, to help encourage this, but also to mean that your fundraising journey is easier on the other side, that we commit that if you raise 300K Aussie from sophisticated investors, that basically just means excluding friends and family, it would include angels as well as VC funds, will 50% match this. Or in other ways, if you say you're looking to raise 1.5 million post-Antler, you raise 1 million from others, we will provide 500K, and that's guaranteed on if you raise the total amount. So it means you've got a third of your round committed. This is actually very strong signaling to existing investors, and that our incentives are all aligned to move through. And then the other thing which would distinguish Antler from many other people in the super early stage is we would aim to be a long-term capital partner and investing up to and including Series C. So up to including pre-A or A from the local Australian fund, but we have a global follow-on fund called Elevate. It's about 300 USD and $1 million in size. They look at the winners from each of the individual Antler locations globally, and then they invest check sizes up to 10 million US going forward. So this is like a major benefit to being able to get outside of Australia sooner rather than later. And the Antler Elevate Fund, they've participated in our last few sort of Series A's, and it's been a really meaningful benefit for the teams involved, both the capital but also the networks. And in fact, Elevate made the intros to a couple of the lead investors of some of the companies I talked about earlier. So that's the initial setup of Antler, who we are and what happens. I will stop sharing now and really just want to hear from you all. So please, if you want to either raise the Zoom hand or hit me up with a question in the chat, and I will look to get through as many as I possibly can. Get that nice awkward silence where everyone's thinking of what to do. It's a nice welcoming crowd. Please don't feel shy. Hopefully, I imagine there's something I've said which has sparked some interest.
I'm going to throw to Liz first.
Hi, I'm Liz. I was just wondering, do you raise capital for sort of early stage physical products, or is it just tech, online innovations?
So we've invested in hardware. I would say that, but it needs to have the scale that means that there is like a venture scale pathway, and that there's very simplistically that there's the route to probably like $1 billion of valuation and or like 100 million of revenue. So I think in that sense, it would probably be like taking examples. This is the ones we've done. The hardware would be something like a filtration tank to be able to convert wastewater to pure water that's installed in factories. So it's much more that side of things than, let's say, you looking to run a craft brewery or other ends of like physical product, or apparel, if you see what I mean.
Gotcha.
Like I said, there's a nuance in there, but yeah, that hopefully gives a bit of a distinction. But certainly, there's multiple investments we made in the last 12 months, which are not just straight software.
Yeah, thank you. That answers the question.
Thanks, Liz. Dimitri, you go for it.
Hi, James. Question, like given Antler invest, like essentially like idea stage startups, what would be the timeline where a startup would start generating revenue?
There are people who will have they will arrive on the kind of problem statement and the idea within the Antler process, and they will generate revenue within like 6 weeks. But there are also businesses we've invested in, which for like, let's imagine they need like TGA approval. It's we have actually invested in something which is a potential early detection for cancer. But if you imagine something like that, that's going to be probably 3 years before it makes revenue, because you need to go through clinical trials, proof of concept, TGA, FDA certification. So there's no like straight answer for it. We've invested, like I said, we've invested in businesses that have made revenue within their first couple of weeks. We've also invested in businesses where we know they won't make revenue for 2 to 3 years.
Okay, so it's really dependent on the founding team and the problem space they operate in, and overall, like in case if it is a very complex problem, then generally founders would look for other investments as well in order to support their journey.
So for
Right.
things which take a longer time to, let's say, obvious metrics like revenue, then what we both work with, but also like challenge founders to outline is in that first year, what's a milestone or milestones that can be achieved that are like would be enticing to the next set of lead investors. So let's take this like early detection, like cancer, that having this being worked on like 1,000 data samples in lab conditions and having those results, that is a demonstrative milestone to have achieved, which de-risks it for future investors, but also gets you a stage on the pathway towards being able to go to clinical trials and other areas. So I think if it's a business that isn't something that you build in the first 3 months and then can be revenue generating, typically then what the flip side of that is, what can you prove within that first period in order to get to a milestone that is kind of not the equivalent of making money, but is a very clear like step change in what the business could achieve. Does that make sense?
Yep, understood. Yeah, it does. Thanks, James.
All good. Alex, we'll go to you, then Natasha, and then I'll do a couple from the chat. Alex, go for it.
Hi, I was just wondering, in terms of that problem definition, are there any specific traits or past experiences you look for that, sort of indicate a strong right to play in terms of defining that problem, like industry experience or just general personality traits and things like that?
So it feels like there's two bits in there. There's one of like personality traits that probably lend itself towards the founding journey, regardless of the business, and then like what does it take to have a team with an unfair advantage, etc. So on the first one, if you look at things like we largely try and break it down into two things. So spike and founder DNA. Founder DNA is like a combination of things like creative problem solving, grit, resilience, charisma. So effectively the things which help us to get a view and believe that through the kind of the tough times that certainly will happen, and that for even our most successful businesses, I'd say more than 50% of them have had probably like a near-death experience at one point or another. How to be able to come through that, as well as in an early stage when no matter what business you're in, you're going to be an underdog and needing to be able to bring people along on the journey with you. So those are some things we look to test for, both in this sort of scouting process, but also through. And then spikes the other area, and that's almost like where I phrase it is like, what's the thing that you might be one of the 5 or 10 best people in the world at? And sometimes it can be something quite clear, like let's suppose you've got a PhD in something I can't even pronounce. Probably that means like what you're talking about in that particular area. But sometimes it can be like much more nuanced, and it can be the things that either you've experienced in your personal life, in your career, or that you've seen. Let's take a practical example of a business we've invested in. So we invested in a predictive analytics for factory machinery business. The person who sort of brought in the kind of the problem space and the idea, he'd seen and done something extremely similar in the automotive side, and was like, why isn't this being done in like a Arnott's factory or a Bega factory? And so that's an example of a spike that, although he didn't know anything about that particular industry itself, he'd seen something analogous, and the actual bones of the technical side elsewhere, was able to apply it. And actually, in that example, and moving on to like what makes a successful team, he met his co-founder and who's the CEO of the business, JP, who's on the commercial side. Interestingly, earlier on in his career, he'd actually sold to the persona of like factory owners, etc. And probably if I'd met JP in the equivalent scenario like this and said to him, you realize like 6 months from now you're going to be doing something in factories, he probably would have been, nah, don't think so. So you quite often get really interesting cross sections of, frankly, like cool stuff that 2 or 3 people have done. Often it's the kind of the next order when you dig into that is where some really fantastic stuff arises. I think the other thing I'll say on the things which have been typically unsuccessful are ones where these are things which I call like commoditized problems that literally like millions of us will have experienced. So let's say affordability of housing or personal finance or health, that certainly there will be many businesses that are successful that are built in that, but the number of people that have a view on it, then the bar's like higher of what is the insight and what's kind of a differentiated take that you may have on that space that may not have occurred to others. Does that help?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Good stuff. Natasha, over to you now. I'll go to someone on the chat.
Hey, James. Sort of related to what you were just talking to there, which is finding two people that had the perfect sort of combination of skill sets to take forward that problem set. What is the process that you go through in this program to actually be matched with a co-founder? Is that pretty organic? Is there like quizzes and Q&As that you're doing to match people up? Yeah, keen to understand what that looks like.
Cool. So from when people go through a process and sort of accept an offer, from like this week, we're actually bringing everyone together in terms of our Slack community, but also we start to run like in-person events in both Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, to mean that people get a chance to get to know each other, but also get a view as to like what each other's interesting areas or particular drives are well ahead of February 3rd. We've often had teams that kind of effectively meet up and start working together before things start. But in a scenario where you come in on day one and you haven't met anyone yet, that first week we bring everyone to Sydney to mean that like everyone in the cohort is together, and you sort of remove some of those barriers or the difficulty of me getting to know you over Zoom and then someone I'm sitting next to like every day. This is a mix of quick fire intros. We actually run a bunch of like design sprints, so you get a chance to see what it's like to work with pretty much everyone else in the cohort in a short sort of sprint time format over like a few hours. I think on the more structural side, in terms of some of the underlying things that help, we work with a third party called Fingerprint for Success. They've mapped the traits of successful like unicorn founders over history, and that we help you to go through that type of like process, but we use it more as it's a really good way for two or three co-founders to see where are the areas that we overlap on, where are the things we may have potential blind spots, and it helps to serve as I always suggest it as something which is use it to confirm or deny things that you're seeing in real life as there. And then the last one, then arguably the most important, is 50 co-founder first questions. So we look to get everyone to go through these sort of 50 questions and actually to independently, and then to actually talk about them with people they're considering building a business with. Probably the quickest analogy to use for that is it's the equivalent of answering all the questions like, do you want to get married? How many kids? Where are you going to live? Pets? Yes, no. Any funny stuff in your family on like date one, rather than dealing with that over as you go over in a relationship. And we found those being some things which are disproportionately helpful for people to get through.
Great.
Cool. I will take on from the chat and then I'll come up to you, Dax, in a sec. So Prue asks, when hearing about a new idea, what do you want to know in the first 60 seconds? I would say it's number one, that there is like a big, painful, either frequent or costly or challenging like problem to go after. I would be interested in a distinct point of view that you have around the problem as to why it's either happened or what could be done, and then why you and insert others are in the, we assume in any given scenario there's 5 or 10 teams building whatever product you could be considering, why you number one in that list. That's what I'd be looking for in the first 60 seconds. Tass, I didn't see you turn up there. Good to see you again. See you, man. So yes, you were in Antler last year and recently pivoted the idea. Start the 10-week program, or is it shortcut to join pitching at Antler's IC? It depends. It probably, if it's a recent pivot, we would need to go earlier back, but it's probably one that you and I should take separately, given we know each other and I know the bits of business. And Stephen asks, got a ref idea, but looking for co-founders. How does Antler help with this? Hopefully you got the answer from what I spoke with Natasha. Tell me if not. The timelines for the next cohort is we're starting our onboarding of people like this week, but it starts on February the 3rd. Like next year is when the cohort start date is. So with that, I will go to you, Dax.
Hi, James. Thanks. Just want to know, well, just any fintechs that you have taken on, and then the process that you were involved with, and then how did you help them, and how did you take them through their fundraising journey, and then how did you bring on sort of overseas investors in, and then how did you sort of make it successful towards, I mean, through the whole journey, I suppose. Just want to see.
Yeah, so I think if you take fintech, let's talk about Upcover that I mentioned before. So they provide insurance to small, medium businesses, and they've also moved into actually like writing their own book of stuff. So Sky's CEO, domain expert, came in with a kind of the idea, met Anish, he'd been exited he was number 2 employee at an Indian now unicorn. He exited that, had moved to Australia like 2 days before like the Antler cohort started, and they teamed up like on day one and started to build there. We initially, and then they found like the CTO as well as part of it. So it was a three person team. I think what it looks like in that stage is they actually went through a whole bunch of initial pivots. So it started off that what was seen at IC was actually like gig economy insurance, not how to underwrite small business insurance. So even this is a relatively common thing that what we see at the investment committee and what we actually invest in, if you look 12 months further on, the problem is often similar they're trying to solve, but the actual product feature, ideal customer changes a lot. And we're a big part of helping to work through some of those, both as like kind of the experts and what we've seen in our careers, but also how we can connect people to different areas. And for Upcover in particular, like one of our LPs was sort of a C-level at a major insurer and was actually able to sort of take them through a whole bunch of areas and help them connect to their debt line. And then on the outcomes in terms of investment, I mean, we've invested probably 4 times into that business ourselves. But the most recent round are the global follow-on fund, Antler Elevate. They came into the Series A, and that they provided the intros, which ended up being the lead investor for Upcover there. And that probably for Upcover, I would say in their early rounds, 25 to 30% of the funds raised came from like Antler LPs separate to Antler. So people that have invested into our fund saw this and would be investing into Upcover anyway, saw this business, were excited about it, had domain expertise, and they angel invested as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good stuff, Dax. Shoya, over to you. And then I'll go back to the chat after that. You're on mute.
Hi, thank you. Thanks. Sorry, I was on mute. I had a question about the logistics of the application. So is there like a last date or a deadline for submitting the application for this round? And what's exactly the timeline like when you decide or finalize the cohort for February?
So it's an ongoing process. So there's already like 20 odd or so people who are signed up and all set to go at this stage. But obviously we've got another 2.5 months until we kick off on day one. So we don't have a hard cutoff date because we realize that things happen in people's lives to mean that they want to get involved at certain points or not. But for anyone who's considering it, I would suggest to apply as early as possible, because that means you know what's going on, and also that if we get there's a point at which if we a number that becomes too unwieldy for us to be able to manage, so we would actually cap the number of offers we'd make at a certain point. And obviously, if someone were to wait until end of January, that puts them in a danger of that. Even if they are potentially great, that we may be full of other great people at that stage. In terms of the process, like typically we run it's like a 3-interview process. I would say it can get done in 3 days. Typically, I'd say it's like a week end to end from like you submit application to the outcome is probably like the sort of a good quick outcome.
And where is the workspace based at in Melbourne?
So Melbourne, we're in Jollymont.
Okay,
so it's close to like, overlooking like Australian Open and MCG, which is a bit. For others that are interested in Sydney, we're in just above Wynyard Station in the tech startup hub, and in Brisbane, we're in Fortitude Valley in the precinct.
Right, that's close to public transport. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool, and I will go back to the chat. So, right, wait, let me scroll back. So Andy says it starts on February 3rd. Can you participate in the first week? You're putting yourself at a major disadvantage, and we would prefer not. It's something we can discuss, but that first week is pretty fundamental in finding co-founder and getting things going. So if that's a challenge, please raise it in the application. But I would recommend to be able to make that first week if you can. So Dom asks, well, first day, February the 3rd. So the first Monday following like Australia Day and when schools are back. Natasha says, what is the financial and other investment one makes to be a part of this program? To join, no investment. So this is, you come in on day one, nothing changes hands. Our investment structure is that we invest 225K for 12% of the business at the IC. If you're successful at IC, we charge a 68K program fee back to that company. So if you are unsuccessful, there's no money changes hands. If you are successful, we charge a program fee to those teams that we invest in. The reason why we do that is that we're upfronting all of like our office space for the 80 or so of you that come in. Plus, we also provide grants and sort of stipends to cushion for those of you coming from paid employment. It's not a replacement for what wage you'd be having, but we provide like a grant stipend to sort of help defray some of those costs that come through. And we incur that for all the people who come in, whether we invest or not, and there's no requirement to pay me that back. But for those we invest in, that's why we charge a program fee. I'll pause there, Natasha. Is any other questions you have on the like terms or anything like that?
I mean, just out of curiosity, would that be pretty standard across early stage VCs in Australia?
Yeah.
For the 12.5%.
We've got a unique model, and so it's not unique, but other VCs would be investing in businesses that are fully formed. So I think the opportunity for co-founder matching that we are providing the space to be able to build in other comparable things they would invest first, but only invest in like fully formed teams and probably like 10 at a time, versus we're bringing in a whole bunch of people to go through. So it's a different model.
Makes sense. Thanks.
I will do the chat and I'll come back to Dax and Ben. So Mandy asks, do we provide visa sponsorship or sport international participant? We don't provide visa sponsorship. It is to have someone who is not based in Australia as part of the early stage team is possible. There's a whole bunch of detail that goes into that around ESVCLP, which is the sort of tax governance of venture capital. Short answer is visa support, no. We do support international participation, but there is some nuance in it. So please discuss if we get to that stage. So Stephen asks, I was approached by Nina. Yes, Nina has left. She's taken a job at Digital Strategy and Coles. So I think for the application, well, I'm on james.mcclure at antler.com, antler.co. So if there's anything you need, I can help there. So back to the live stuff. I'll go Ben first, given I've heard from you, Dax, and then Dax, you go next.
Thanks, James. Understand the selection process and sort of and how that works. Is there any insight you can give on the process that's not in the notes and particular things you look for, and I suppose with a focus on the interviews?
Because I think it's quite often that even if you've submitted like a pitch deck and a whole bunch of other stuff in there, you will feel that it's much more about you than the business. And so that the reason why we do that is that what I said before, that quite often what people sort of have as the view as to what they're doing often changes because they meet someone else or invalidate it and move through. But also that more importantly, like we know that the founding team was 2 or 3 people. To some extent, it kind of doesn't matter so much what the business is if those people are fantastic. So like that interview process, really trying to bring out what I spoke about earlier of like what's like your spike or spikes, and what are the elements of things like creative problem solving, leadership, grit, resilience, that either we often ask like kind of a lot of like tell me a time when ... type questions. Without giving too much away, you may come across the odd question where you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That's also designed to at least see how you react to certain areas.
Got it.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Back to you, Dax.
Thanks, James. Just want to know in terms of marketing and sort of top line marketing, would you sort of help in that area as well to get the brand out there?
So I mean, like we're not an incubator. Like we don't have a marketing team that works with the business, but what we do is a lot of like PR related work, both in terms of let's say like events where you're getting you in front of potential investors and potential customers, because obviously we get asked about a lot of conference speaking slots, and we look to maneuver those to the relevant portfolio company. Others, we run a bunch of investor events ourselves. For example, like earlier on this year, we ran something at Google's office in Sydney where we invited a bunch of Sydney-based VCs, and for our most recent investments, we sort of showcased them in a live pitch event. We also have got an online showcase that investors can come access. Then on the pure PR side, we do a bunch of like releases around the investments that we make, and particularly where there are milestones that you've achieved, we can either help sort of draft some of those comms, but also use our media contact to like AFR, Capital Brief, Fast Company, Smart Company, etc., to help distribute. So I think we can be an amplifier, and there'll be consistent things over a year where we've got either slots or events which would work well for portcos. But I don't want you to leave this thinking that we've got a marketing team who we just sort of parachute into businesses.
Well, we can do things together.
Yeah, exactly. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Cool. That helps. Cheers.
All right, cool. So back to the chat. Maysam asks, as an Australian, can I join Antler in other countries, or is it only available to citizens of those countries? It depends on that country's immigration laws. So, and obviously where you want to be. So let's say, for example, I know that Dubai are very open and that they will give visas to people who are looking to start businesses. If it was the US, that would be much more so. But as a general rule, you would need to have working rights in whichever Antler location you have an interest in. If you don't have that, then it would be a non-starter. All right, I've exhausted the chat and I've exhausted the live ones. Like, what else have you got for me? I can probably have them the awkward silence longer. Yes, excellent, Dimitri. Go for it, Dimitri.
Another question regarding like the makeup of what founders are. For example, like if someone had an idea to handle something that is hardware related. So generally, like kind of a picture I have in my head would be there needs to be, like a business oriented person, maybe like software oriented person and hardware oriented person. Like, does Antler or have Antler had sort of similar composition of founders for companies that pursue like hardware related ideas?
Hardware can often be a two co-founder team as well. So if I think of two recent businesses, one's called Nexabot, which is doing like robotic logistics in sort of third-party warehouse sites. So if you imagine like a small Amazon sorting house, they've built a robot which is able to move things around. That's a two-person co-founding team. One who's the robotic side and is I don't think he'll be too annoyed by me saying he is a competent software engineer, but like he's a robotics guy first, but he's good enough on the software to drive things through. And then Dom's like the business or commercial side. Or we also made a DTC hardware investment probably a couple of weeks ago called Oryx. So this is actually like basically like aromatherapy devices in a DTC basis. Again, it was a two-person team. Adam, who sort of brought in the idea, is commercial brains behind it, and then Alex, who again is robotics background, but also is a pretty solid software developer. So I guess what I'm trying to get is you don't necessarily need to have one person for every single discipline. Sometimes it ends up like that, or often we find that, like, let's say it's something which is a hardcore like enterprise SaaS infrastructure type play, that the person who's the technical brains behind it may not be the greatest designer or front ends like known to the world. Often that's something you can often just like contract out, to be honest. So I wouldn't get too caught up on the makeup of the team, but what you need to consider is the essential items that make a business successful or not is that within the co-founding team, and whether that's 2 people or 3 people is less important than, do you have like the most important aspects for success in this business covered within the 2 or 3 of you?
Okay, gotcha. And would it be fair to say that Antler prefers, like co-founded teams that consist of 2 people over 3?
Yes, primarily that's a twofold. That's one of like a runway question. So for 3-person co-founding teams, you've got a 3rd person taking salary, the money's going to go quicker. Therefore, in a 3-person team, what's that 3rd person doing that is something which extremely accelerates the opportunity of success in that. So we don't we've invested in plenty of 3-person co-founding teams, but they often have like the dynamics, some things you've talked about, where the dynamics where there is a domain expert, maybe is the CEO, plus like someone on the commercial side and someone to actually like build the technical products.
Okay, good. Thanks, James.
That's Richard. Natasha?
So with that sort of co-founder matching tends to be that you pursue obviously one of the 2 ideas. Does that mean you have a good handful of people that come into this program without an idea, but the intention to build something?
Yes, but what I challenge you on is like, this isn't picking the best of ideas. So there's 3 categories of people that I would say would come in. One is someone who's like, the problem space that they want to go after, they're going to do this come hell or high water. There's a second category who are coming in with like, here's the stuff I'm interested in. Maybe I've got, like I've got some back of napkin ideas, or I've done some wireframes or whatever, but I'm pretty open. But hey, if nothing, I want to explore these, but I'm open to see what else is there. And then the 3rd set of people are like here's the stuff I'm good at and what I'm excited about. The particular idea hasn't really hit me yet. I would like to see what else is out there. And I think often it's, like I said, like even in the scenarios where it's, let's say, groups 1 and 2, it isn't necessarily, let's say, like a game of poker where it's like, show your hand, which one's better? Oh, I will take which one's better. Often things can be like tweaked and bits in between. And then the other thing I'd say is that there will be a good proportion of the ideas that and teams we invest in where the business, where the business is actually like generated the problem space, the idea is built within the Antler process. In fact, like in 15 minutes, we're out to do an investment committee, and the team that's coming to that one, like they teamed up in like week 4 or 5 around a particular problem space. And if you'd spoken to either of them at this kind of stage, although when you look at their backgrounds, you can see why they're involved in it now, but the things they were looking to pursue were pretty different.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Cool. I'll take one to the chat. Lulu, can you give more details on the 10-week residency, output from the founder team, and what is Antler looking in terms of assessing whether they'll go ahead and invest? Very dependent on the type of business, but I think what particularly in that like 5-week due diligence period where you have a formed team and are moving towards IC, you'd work with your coach. Let's say it's me around like what are some of the goals we want to achieve during this 5-week period. And if I take a fairly, let's say, I imagine this is a fairly vanilla B2B SaaS type product, then those sort of things would look like, is there a at least probably like a clickable prototype, or maybe even like an MVP that can be built hacky, how to generate some real like either waitlist or LOI based demand, and outlining who your ideal customer profile would be. It may be considering on who your next set of investors are. It could be understanding, is there an appetite for this in another market than Australia? Those are some of the areas, but to be clear, there's not like a you get to this milestone investment happens, or you don't get to this milestone investment doesn't happen. Each business is different, and we work through that in the due diligence period as to what we're looking for. Jordan asked, like, what transition looked like for someone coming for this full-time employment through the program. So our expectation and what we require is that you're full-time on February the 3rd. We think it's important for everyone else in there that, you know, everyone's all in. There's not the kind of tourists of going, well, you know, this doesn't work out, you know, I can just go back to the thing I've taken a couple of weeks off work for and everything's fine. What we require is that you are all in on this. But we realize that you know, one of the things we are proud of is we support people from like lots of different backgrounds, and that what we provide to help cushion some of that is 2 sort of stipends or grants. So those are conditional on progress through the program, but it would be one in the middle of the formation and validation period, and then if based on basic attendance, and if you're in the due diligence phase, based on getting through to the due diligence phase. Those look like if you're someone who is attending an Antler residency in the city that you live in, or within a sensible commuting distance, that would be 2 individual tranches of $1,500. If you've traveled interstate or from a very, very far away, so let's say you live in Perth and you come to one of Sydney, Melbourne, or Brisbane, then those stipends would be 3,000. Hopefully that helps, Jordan. All right, last call for any questions. If not, well, you know where to. Oh, Dimitri, last one.
Yeah, last second. A question: have you had people going through the program and sort of, or I'm assuming you had, going through the program and then sort of not being able to secure investment at the end of it? Like, what happened to them? Like, like, can you describe rough statistics if you have a?
Sure. So the simplest way to think of it is we get around like 4,000 applications a year. We invest in roughly 15 to 20 businesses a year. So the success from application rate to investment is about like 0.51%. Then for people coming into each cohort is somewhere typically 70 to 80, but let's help my mental maths out on a Wednesday lunchtime. Let's imagine there's 80 people coming on day one. Out of each cohort, historically, we've made, say, like 7 to probably the max is 11 investments. Let's say it's 10 people, 2 co-founders per team, 20 founders out of 80, roughly 25% chance of if you're there on day one. For teams that we don't invest in, then in some cases they actually continue. They continue to build and carry on and go forward. Sometimes people will not look to proceed and go back to corporate life or other things. There's no sort of fixed way that it goes.
Okay, thanks.
Shoya, and then I'll
Hi,
come to
sorry, I one more last question. I think you quickly mentioned about stipend. I just had a question about that.
Yeah.
So when you win stipend, is it something like tax deductible like we get for PhD, we get a PhD stipend? Or it's something
I'm not providing any level of tax advice on this, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you.
Go on then. Jordan asks, has Antler ever backed any solo founders? Yes, but rarely. Both the stats and typical experience suggest that co-founding teams are more successful than solo co-founders. The reason for that is twofold. One, founding is pretty bloody hard, and over like a 5-10 year period, that one person's got to handle the brunt of that is a challenge. But more practically, to have the ideal skills to create the perfect set of skills to create a particular business, it is very rare that one person has all of those things. So where there is someone who is both a fantastic fundraiser, a fantastic salesperson, and a fantastic engineer, those are times when we will back solo founders. Typically, it is rare that someone is 9 out of 10 in all of those disciplines. Therefore, it is a rarity for us to back solo founders. Dax, sounds like you got a question on that.
Sorry, mate, just one final question. Where else are you guys active in like the global arena? Like, are you guys active in like South Asia? Are you guys active like around that sort of area, or just around
Yeah, so it's the funds would be like LATAM based out of Brazil, US, we've got 3 locations in the US, Canada out of Toronto, UK, then we've got a sort of pan-European fund, which is France, Germany, and like a bit of Spain. We've got a Nordics fund, there's a MENA Pakistan fund, there's India, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea.
Very interesting.
I apologize to any of my colleagues that I've forgotten, but I think that's everyone.
That's it.
Sorry, Africa. Sorry, we've got Kenya and Nigeria. Sorry, I knew I'd forgotten someone.
I think you got them in last minute. So just if you already have operations in those, let's say specifically the South Asian regions, then it'll be helpful to sort of get connected with your colleagues over there as well. As
in fact, we often get at our investment committees, we often invite partners from the other from the other Antler funds to come attend and be sort of guests, because often they've got expertise in a particular discipline that we may not, but also actually help some of these connections to form in the future.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. Cheers.
Stuff. Well, I think with that, I will call it there. I really appreciate you spending your lunchtime with me. It was a real pleasure, and hopefully I'll look forward to meeting you in an Antler interview and or cohort coming up soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Thanks.